Welcome to the audiobook. My French teacher claims I'm his mate. By Lara Simpson. Narrated by Vicky. Chapter 1. Meet Mr. Donovan. We often delude ourselves into believing the little bubble we live in is all there is to the world, when actually there are far too many things we've never even heard of. The world seems easy to understand, yet reality is something else altogether. Maria was sitting at her desk, just writing random stuff in some paper, when the door opened and a fuss abruptly stopped in the classroom. Walked in a teacher, probably. She couldn't say really, since she didn't bother to raise her head. She heard whispering, though. It couldn't be helped that she started to wonder about what was going on. Nevertheless, she didn't look up. A very sexy, melodic, and strangely enough, unfamiliar voice could be heard from the front of the classroom. "Good morning, everyone. I'm Mr. Donovan, your new French teacher," said Mr. Donovan. Remained quiet for a minute or so, then said in a seemingly hesitant manner, We could get to know each other today." Then added in a more confident one, "Feel free to ask me any question you'd like." Maria heard the school bitch, Sandra, ask him how old he was. Well, that was weird, she thought. When did she get interested in teachers as well? Sandra was known to like her men, boys, well built like those of the soccer team. And she had done all of them, hence the nickname Maria had given her. Still, Maria couldn't bring herself to care. At least, not enough to look up. She therefore continued her dawdling. The teacher answered in what could only be considered as a confused tune. "I'm 24. Not that it should matter. I'm qualified." Maria heard some giggling and just rolled her eyes at the shallowness of some girls. Next question was by Blondie, aka Becky, who was none other than Sandra's #1 clone. "Are you single?" At that, Maria grew impossibly curious to see the new teacher. First, they had asked about his age, then about his situation, taken or free. She had to see him. She finally raised her head from the desk. To say the view that greeted her was unexpected would be the understatement of the year. There, sitting on a teacher's desk, was by far the sexiest man she had ever had a chance to lay eyes on. Tall, about 6 feet, well-built, with large shoulders and a defined chest, a strong angular jaw, high cheekbones, and luscious firm lips to die for. She then greedily looked up a little more, only to lock eyes with the most beautiful forest green ones she had ever seen. The new French teacher removed a lock of his raven-colored, ear-level hair that came blocking his side, and then finally answered, "I'm actually currently single." And that was Maria's cue to stop checking out the new teacher and break the eye contact. "Oh my God," she inwardly squealed. She sure as hell wished she hadn't looked up, because the piece of candy that had been assigned to them as a teacher could only mean troubles with a big T. Mr. Donovan asked each student to tell him the name, the age, and something interesting. As the first role was basically a slot-only role, and he started right from it, Maria couldn't suppress the urge to yawn out of boredom. She gradually became more and more absorbed in her thoughts and zoned out for a while. It was only when she heard him calling her name that she broke out of her reveries. Upon seeing him standing right next to her, it was all she could do to hold back a gasp of surprise. When did he get here? As she remained frozen in her seat, totally and completely spellbound, though desperately trying to remember whatever it was he had asked, he put his hand on her shoulder. And right away, she became even more aware of him. If that was even possible, because the part of bare skin he touched tangled with small, delicious shocks. It felt as if fireworks were taking place in her stomach, and a wave of desire suddenly came over her, throwing her off guard. Never had Maria felt so lustful after someone. She could have sworn she saw his eyes widen for a second, then go back to normal, right before he abruptly pulled his hand away. But maybe that was just her imagination. The loss of contact made her regain her senses. What the hell just happened to me? She inwardly groaned, feeling too embarrassed to even look at him. She couldn't wonder too much about it, though, since his voice came interrupting her train of thoughts. So, miss, care to tell us about yourself? His voice was kind of husky. It couldn't possibly be because of their brief flesh contact. It would be totally insane of her to think that, wouldn't it? Get a grip, girl. She mentally reprimanded herself, clearing her throat slightly, since it had gotten pretty dry. She looked ahead of her and said in what she could only wish sounded like a calm tune. Well, I'm Maria Jensen, 18, and I love playing music. Huh, interesting. He commented from where Has was sitting behind his desk. And on what instrument would that be? He actually seemed to care about the answer. No, Maria was probably just imagining things. That had to be it. She replied in a nonchalant, dismissing voice. I play most of the time on the piano, though sometimes I prefer the violin. He nodded in acknowledgement, then stated that starting tomorrow there would be no use of English in his class, and that all students ought to speak in French no matter what. Most of the class groaned, while Maria smiled briefly. She loved the subject and excelled at it. Otherwise, she wouldn't be taking this class, feeling oh so miserably alone, as all of her friends didn't. As soon as he finished those words, the bell rang, signaling the end of the first period. As Maria rose from her chair, she heard the voice of the guy who was supposed to own her every thought, Tyler, her boyfriend. Hey, baby, how was your first period? She looked his way, smiled, then answered truthfully. Interesting. She came to her side and gently pecked her lips. Then, with his hand around her waist, they went to their second period together. Maria noticed, however, as they walked by the teacher's desk, that Mr. Donovan seemed tense. His right hand was in a fist, and the other gripped the desk tightly. His eyes were closed and his face was nothing but a large scowl. She was left to wonder about what could have possibly made him upset. He seemed to be fine all through the period. Today was Blake's first day at Oldmont's High School. He wasn't particularly excited or nervous, since it wasn't his first time teaching. Therefore, he was neither hurrying down the hallways nor dragging his feet. Before entering the classroom that was destined to be his for the time being, he didn't fail to smell the faint scent of freshly spilled blood. He could only assume a student had cut himself or something. Blake took some deep breaths, then stopped breathing all at once. Damn that chick for not leaving sooner this morning. I would have fed if I wasn't running late. He thought angrily. He entered the classroom, put his bag on a desk, then turned around and began a very familiar ritual. Present himself to his pupils for the ear, then allowing them to ask questions. Some blonde bimbo who was batting her eyelashes at him and pulling down her slutty top asked him about his age in a supposed to be seductive tone. Blake suppressed the urge to frown at her behavior. He might be a player, but he didn't do schoolgirls. He answered in a fake, confused tone. I'm 24. Not that it should matter. I'm qualified. She giggled and was soon enough joined by the girl sitting near her. If only they knew just how old he was, they would be running away horrified. Not that he would tell them, of course. A similarly blonde bimbo then asked him if he was single. Oh man, I know I'm good-looking, but going for the teacher? Isn't that against the law or something? His inner voice turned sarcastic, like it did at times like this. Mentally signing, he was about to respond when a girl in the back seat raised her head from the table. He felt unnaturally mesmerized by her features. Her straight black hair was hiding her slightly rosy cheeks, and she was obviously doing him a scanner. Not that he should be complaining, he was giving her the same treatment. When they actually locked eyes, he was overwhelmed by some unknown warmth in the pit of his stomach. And that's when he answered. I'm actually currently single. Blake was glad that the unnamed girl broke their eye contact, because for some unfathomable reason, he wasn't able to. He was drawn to her in a way that was completely beyond him. Yeah, so much for I don't do schoolgirls. He thought bitterly. It's probably the lack of blood. He tried to convince himself a second later. And just like that, he dismissed the matter from his mind and started getting to know his students, as he was supposed to. When it was the turn of that girl, she didn't say a thing. What was wrong with her? He caught out confused though, admittedly. He was inwardly sighing. Miss? He expected her to hear him and get out of the trance she was in. But no. Reluctantly, Blake pulled himself up, then went to her side. He called out again, and that was when he came back to her senses. She was bravely confused when she saw him standing next to her. Then her face went blank for a minute or so. What was she thinking about? Was she zoning out again? No way was he going to let her. He put his hand on her shoulder. That was partly bare because of her sleeveless white shirt, about to shake her out of it. And that's when it hit him. There was tangles everywhere they touched. His senses started to come alive. He felt almost reborn, whole. It was as if he became a new man. Blake's eyes widened of their own accord briefly, but he recovered in less time than it took to blink. He was completely consumed by lust, and that was the only reason why he quickly pulled his hand away. Well, that and the fact that there were students watching them. He was happy the loose pants he was wearing were what he first laid eyes upon this morning when opening the closet. Otherwise, he'd be in for one hell of a rough time. He breathed in for the first time since he entered the classroom, though he was safe a long time ago. It's just that he got distracted, and that's when he smelled her scent. It was so intoxicating. It drew him even more to her. Oh, hell and damnation. I'm so whipped already. He realized, feeling the need for her increase, if that was even possible. He mentally shook himself, then said in a quiet tone that, to his utter and complete dismay, came out husky. So, miss, care to tell us about yourself? She cleared her throat, and Blake just hoped she was feeling at least 1% of what he was enduring, then said in a controlled voice, Well, I'm Maria Jensen, 18, and I love playing music. While she was saying that, he returned to his desk, desperate to put some space between them, though admittedly he was pained to do so. He was too close for his own comfort and peace of mind. And he couldn't do anything in front of a classroom full of students. Therefore, that had to be his best option. Blake was about to rest against his desk, but thought better of it and went straight for the chair, thus efficiently hiding his raging hard-on. He then asked her what instrument he played on. It would be safe to say he didn't do a good job at hiding his interest in her. I play most of the time on piano, though sometimes I prefer the violin, she said in her melodic voice. He merely nodded at that, not wanting to ask more about her, for he would definitely find the time to get to know her soon enough. He then went on about how the students were not to speak to him in other than French during his period and things like that. Blake was forcing himself not to look her way. What if those beautiful, deep, chocolate brown eyes of hers were looking right back at him? He was sure he wouldn't be able to look away, and he most definitely did not want to get busted. Right when the bell rang and she rose from her seat, there was this boy with messy blonde hair, sparkling blue eyes, looking at her. He heard him say, "Hey, baby, how was your first period?" "Baby?" Blake inwardly repeated with a mental growl, feeling jealousy gnawing at his insides and something close to fury filling him. The sweet Maria looked at the guy, smiled warmly, then answered with a simple, "Interesting." Blake watched the foreign student as he went to her side, pecked her lips, and then actually put his arm around her waist. And all of that in front of him. Blake was on the verge of losing control. She had a boyfriend, one that needed to keep his hands to himself on the top of that. He didn't even want to know how deep they were in their relationship, for he didn't want to do something foolish, like killing him, so soon in the morning. He sensed that his eyes were about to change, and that's why he closed them, and remained right where he was. He took deep breaths, and kept thinking of different ways to get his mate away from that jerk she was with, all the while gripping the desk with his left hand pretty tightly, and fisting the other hand in pure frustration. Soon enough, it was time for lunch, and Maria was heading towards the cafeteria, walking hand in hand with Tyler. She was suddenly blinded by the pair of soft, familiar hands. Maria giggled, then said playfully, "Grow up, Kelly. Come on." Her best friend removed her hands and smiled warmly at her before telling her jokingly, "I'm not that immature." Maria gave her an unbelieving, "Yeah, right" look then, feeling as if it wasn't enough, added, "Yes, you are, most of the time." She made sure to draw the most part before hurrying to say, upon seeing her friend narrowing her eyes in mock anger, "But I love you anyway." Kelly laughed and nodded, agreeing readily. All the while, Tyler didn't take part in the discussion, until then at least, when he smilingly commented, "Good to see you in a good mood now, Kelly." She sighed, then said with a dreamy tune, "Who wouldn't be? I have just seen the new French teacher." She paused to sigh again. "I don't think it should be legal to be that hot. He's so edible." Maria laughed at her statement, whereas Tyler frowned. "Ew, he's a teacher for God's sake." "So?" Kelly simply glared at him. "We're both adults for all I care." Maria smiled at her stubbornness, but observed in a serious tone, "But it's against the school policy." The bubbly blonde simply dismissed the thought with a wave of her hand. Then, looking at her, said with obvious envy, You're so lucky to have a reason to stare at him for a whole hour. Maria just grinned and couldn't help but agree. Yes, I am, but so are Sandra and her clowns, she added, nodding their way as they walked by them. Tyler asked in fake distress, his eyes widening in a funny way. You're on her side? Maria wanted to tease him a little. That she answered truthfully. Well, he is handsome, very handsome. She put emphasis on the very part, wanting to see his reaction. He narrowed his eyes and asked in a serious tone, Is that so? Maria just squeezed his hand and told him in a husky tone while eyeing him up and down. But I like you more. Though if she were to be truthful, they were like worlds apart. Too different to be even compared. But she didn't want to think about her teacher when she was with the most caring boyfriend a girl could dream of. Tyler seemed relieved, then smirking and pulling her a tiny bit closer. He said in a teasing tone, I definitely can't complain about you either, babe. Maria rolled her eyes at that, smiling, but Kelly can't suppress the urge to bug him. I have to be honest with you, bro, since your girl isn't. She looked at her best friend, her eyes twinkling with mischief. He is way sexier. She made sure to draw the way, then added in a lost feel tone. He is just yummy, unlike you. She finished in a seemingly disgusted tone, just before she took off, going to bring her trail of food. He stood there, glaring at her for a moment, and then snapped out of it. Sometimes I wish she was my twin. She can be so childish. He admitted in a slightly irritated tone. Maria just laughed and tugged at his arm so that they could go stand in a line too. She didn't want to be late for her afternoon's first period on her first day back to school. At the end of the day, Maria was walking out of the school building, talking to Kelly while holding hands with Tyler when he unexpectedly said, as they reached the parking lot, Sorry, babe, but I've got to go. Today we have the trials. His girlfriend smiled at him, understandingly, then told him it was okay, and that she'd see him tomorrow. Despite her not knowing of his desire to join the team, she brushed it off and did not think anything of it. He smiled back, and that's when she tiptoed and kissed him slightly on the lips. It was just a peck, since she was not really a girl for heavy PDA. Maria felt as if someone was watching them, her. She turned around and looked, but there was nobody in sight that seemed to look at her. What's wrong? Tyler asked, confusion clear on her face. Maria shoved the silly thought away and smiled at him before saying, Nothing, just go, or you'll be late for the trials. He pulled her to him for another sweet, though a tad longer kiss, then walked away while waving goodbye. Maria had again the feeling of being watched, but when she turned around this time, she found the new teacher looking in her direction, intently she might add. She involuntarily flinched, and that was when he decided to enter his car. What the hell? He was looking at her as if she did something to upset him. He looked angry. No, it has to be something else, she reasoned. Kelly pressed on a hunk, and Maria just dismissed the insanity she had on her mind. He was a teacher and in his 20s, for God's sake. No way was he sparing her as much as a thought. She was just another student to him after all. He, on the other hand, had actually claimed one hell of a place in her mind in no more than one day. I couldn't possibly be having a crush on my new teacher, could I? Not that it would lead to anything. One look at him is sufficient to know he has no problem getting laid at all whenever he wants, without a doubt. I, on the other hand, am quite plain, with black hair and dull brown eyes, There is no way he could view me the way I do him. Kelly sighed from next to her, bringing Maria out of her musings. She turned to her left, where she was impatiently drumming on the wheel, and noticed that they were in front of the house she loosely called home. She had a frown on her beautiful face as she observed in a grave tune that was not like her bubbly self. You were way too silent for my liking. I'm tired of doing the talking. Maria shrugged carelessly, shamelessly grinning at her. Her best friend narrowed her eyes at her, and that was Maria's cue to prepare herself for the speech to come. You know, you zoom out way too much. If there is something that is bothering you that I don't know about, you better tell me what it is or who it is, and we will solve the problem just like 2 + 2 = 4. Maria finished for her in a faint, weary tune. Kelly glared at her at first, then suddenly burst off laughing, and soon enough, Maria couldn't help but join her. I never realized how many times I said the same damn thing, her friend told her in between gasps. She had been laughing so hard that by the end of her little fit, she had tears trickling down her cheeks. That was the thing with Kelly. If she laughed too much, one must prepare some handkerchiefs. She wiped away her purely drops, then repeatedly blinked her blue eyes before gaining back her calm and singing a tune so sincere it left Maria feeling warm inside. Anyway, you know, I'm here for you, and I'll always be, right? I know. It was the truthful answer she got, as a small smile tugged at Maria's mouth. You worry too much about me. The blonde mumbled something like, someone has to. Pain slashed through Maria at that, but she forced herself to smile, then just hugged her in response. It was no hardship for her, since she had grown used to hiding her feelings. Practice does make perfect, she inwardly sighed bitterly. Mentally shaking her head, clearing her mind from the depressing thoughts awaiting her if she were to continue down that road, Maria told Kelly goodbye, then opened her car's door to slide in the afternoon's warmth. As she knocked on the door of the big house in front of her, Maria could hear her best friend taking off. She took some deep breaths and prepared herself for what was to come her way. How could she ever feel home here when the bitch she had for a stepmother made her life a living hell? Teresa, the maid, opened the door for Maria, her smiling face of great solace to her. She was about 30 or something and was a really nice lady. Good afternoon. Maria greeted her cheerfully, inwardly hoping the bitch wasn't home. The maid responded with a warm smile upon her face. Good afternoon, sweetie. How was your first day back at school? Maria was about to answer when a high-pitched voice that belonged to none other than her stepmother reached them. You are late, Maria, she reprimanded. What kept you so long? My day has been fine, very good even, until about now, Maria thought, inwardly sighing in dismay. She felt a frown forming on her face while Teresa, smiling apologetically, put her hand on the small of her back, ushering her to where El Diablo was, the living room. There, seated on a big white sofa in front of the TV was Maria's very slutty, very touchy, and absurdly dumb stepmother. She had shoulder-length blonde hair, big baby blue eyes that did not suit her. They were contacts anyway. With a small figure, a thin waist, big remade boobs, heavy makeup, and barely enough clothes to cover her, she looked like nothing but a cheap whore. She was reddening. Maria could only guess that it was due to the fact that she had yet to answer her. Her disdain-filled stare maybe had something to do with that as well. Well, serves you right. Maria thought angrily. You could answer me when I talk to you. Her stepmom was glaring daggers at her, but she could not care less. Yeah, but I prefer not to. She countered in the coldest tone she could muster. Maria averted her eyes and looked at the window, waiting for her to tell her whatever he had called her for. Just get done with it already. She wanted to tell her but refrained from doing so, for she could do without the additional minutes she'd have to spend listening to her. Your father should have never brought you here, she all but yelled while jumping out of the sofa. A smirk played on the corner of Maria's mouth, and she could not help talking back to her, her voice dripping with sarcasm while eyeing her stepmom up and down. My father should wear glasses as well. To say her stepmom was fuming would not even begin to describe it. Maria was usually not this straightforward with her, but as she turned 18 last week, she was now capable of walking out of that door without looking back any time she wanted. And if it weren't for her little half-brother, whom she loved to no end, she would not have thought about it twice. Life is unfair sometimes. She mentally groaned. Scratch that. Life is unfair most of the time. Clara, aka 𝘸𝘰𝘠𝑦𝘠, clapped her hands a couple of times as if to get her attention, then said in her high-pitched voice, Do you even listen to me? What do you want? Maria asked in surrender, sighing as she looked expectantly at her. I'm going out, having a little girl's time with Shelby and Emma, she informed her as she turned around, making a beeline for the door. You stay home and babysit. It was not a request, but an order. Maria shrugged, since she didn't have anything to do anyway and nowhere to go. Might as well make the evening enjoyable a little bit. She claimed she was going to have some girls' time with her friends, but Maria knew better. It only meant she was in need of some action, and she was going to get it, since Maria's father was almost always absent. She was going to screw the brains out of some random guy whose looks and name she won't remember by the end of the night. If only my father saw her for what she was, not for what she looked like. Maria thought somewhat bleakly. Not that I care. She almost immediately squashed the feeling of pity she was getting. He was not what one would consider a father. Chapter 2. Here Comes the Troubles. At around 7:30, Maria was riding with Kelly and Tyler in their new black BMW. Her boyfriend was so nervous about the results, whether he was going to be a part of the team or not, that he didn't say a word after the good morning he had tossed out. But it was okay with Maria. She didn't blame him at all. Kelly, on the other hand, was talking about how hot the French teacher was. Her friend just nodded absent-mindedly from time to time. Upon their arrival, they made a beeline to the classes building and were kind of hurrying so as not to be late, when Sandra came almost running to them. She flicked her hair and grinned foolishly. Maria was looking at her as if she was crazy. They usually didn't mix. One could see perfectly why. She, however, was eyeing Tyler in a way that Burnett didn't give a damn about, for she knew her boyfriend didn't like sluts. And Sandra was one of the worst. Welcome to the team. We were told today that you're going to be our quarterback. She had the talent to make her voice so sickly sweet. It made Maria want to gag. On a second thought, it might just be a curse. Maria mused sarcastically. Sandra's clone, Becky, came swaying her hips, put her hand on Tyler's arm and purred in what Maria assumed was supposed to be a seductive tune. That is so awesome. She kind of sounded dumb speaking like that, and Maria could barely resist the urge to roll her eyes at her. Then, glancing at her watch, she noticed they had still about 5 more minutes before the bell rang. "Thanks, I guess," Tyler answered, his tone somewhere between happy and confused. Both fake blondes glared at Maria, and then, in cinch, turned around and went their own way. What the hell was wrong with those girls? Kelly's eyes were practically spitting fire when her best friend looked at her after their departure. Who the hell do they think they are? They flirted with you shamelessly, in front of your girlfriend. She was addressing her twin in such an angry way because of Maria, and more importantly, forgetting her, that this latter could only hope she would be able to make it out of her sight without her noticing. No such luck. She turned to look at her and told her in a reproach, still fuming. "And you didn't even say a word." I should have? To say Maria was confused by her little outburst would be the understatement of the year. The usually bubbly blonde looked more pissed, if that was even possible. "What do you think, smart one?" Tyler was long gone. He had mumbled something about seeing the coach, but Maria was sure it was just an excuse. Kelly could be scary when she wanted to be. Therefore, Maria was left outside, alone, to deal with her best friend's fury. She looked at her in wonder. She had her beautiful blue eyes glaring daggers, and her meatbag blonde hair locks playing in the wind. "I'm not a jealous type, Kelly." And her friend knew it, so what was there to be angry about? She looked at her strangely for a moment, then her eyes widening. She said in her "I just discovered something big today" tune, "Then you don't love Tyler." Now it was when Maria's eyes turned to widen. She immediately denied with a vehement, "Yes, I do." Her friend's gaze softened at that, and then, smiling, she added in the motherly tune she often took with her, "Of course you do, but you're not in love with him." What the hell was she talking about? Maria had never been a big fan of philosophy. Freaking intriguing sentences. She inwardly groaned, growing frustrated. Kelly must have noticed her confused face because she patted her on the back and then proceeded to explain. "I mean, you love him, but only as a good friend, nothing else." Why couldn't she have said so earlier? Maria was about to answer her when the first bell rang. The two girls could only hurry to that damned old white building they had yet to enter. Kelly hastily waved goodbye, then went her way to the Spanish class, while Maria had to almost run to get to her French one, since it was in the second floor. She was right in front of the door, ready to turn the handle, when the late bell rang. Damn it! Maria inwardly grimaced. Needless to say, the flow of profanities came to her mind pretty quickly. Who would want a detention so soon in school year? She knocked on the door and opened when she heard a small "Enter." She was greeted by the sight of her French teacher sitting on her desk, looking absolutely and totally edible in a black button-up shirt and dark blue jeans. Damn him for being so hot. Maria averted her eyes and sighed inwardly in dismay as she felt her body heating up. She collected her thoughts, then apologized in what sounded like a calm tune. "Sorry I'm late, sir." He smirked, then retorted, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Désolé, mademoiselle, mais je ne comprends pas ce que vous me dites." Sorry, miss, but I don't understand what you're telling me. Maria looked at him, confused for a split second. Then it sank in. They were to talk to him only in French the entire time. She smiled without even noticing. Veuillez m'excuser pour le retard, monsieur. Please forgive my tardiness, sir. His smirk got wider before he informed her of the awaited verdict. Cela n'est rien. Vous aurez le plaisir d'être la première à venir être avec moi. It's all right. You'll have the pleasure to be the first to have a detention with me. Maria couldn't help but groan at that. Smiling ever so lightly, he asked in a taunting tone, Vous avez quelque chose à dire, mademoiselle? You have something to say, miss? Like a good pupil, Maria just growled and said nothing. She went straight to her desk. She decided that she would keep her eyes off of him for this hour just to punish herself. He became that much less edible since the detention he gave her, or so she was knowingly deluding herself. He made her actually read a whole page. That jerk. Is he seriously picking on me? She inwardly face-palmed, cursing her bad luck. Another girl read, but she had such a bad accent that he asked Maria to read again. Her French was flawless after all. When she was about to start again, Sandra said in a high-pitched voice that made her want to put her hands over her ears. Why does she get to read again? She was putting so much disdain in her tone. It left Maria wondering once again why she hated her so much. Parle en français. The teacher scolded seriously. Speak in French. She said what she meant in French with such a thick accent. The difference between both students couldn't have been clearer. He answered, saying that he was just explaining the poem to them. Thus, he would like for someone to read it well. Whining as well, she argued right back, as she was used to getting her way. But I could read too. Then she added with so much venom in her voice, it shocked Maria. Her mother is French. Now, that was beyond the point. So? Maria couldn't help the irritation that had seeped into her tone as she addressed her sworn enemy. She had no right, absolutely none, to talk ill about her mom. You shouldn't take this class. She flipped her hair as if to mark her words. You still have that accent of yours after 3 years here, loser. Maria couldn't understand Sandra's reasoning. Why would she even try? She had decided to hate her the moment she had laid her eyes on her. Just go find some guy to... Maria started in a loud, seemingly bored voice in which one could easily detect the anger, and then trailed off, remembering just in time that they were still in a classroom, in the front of a teacher no less. Ah, damn. She worriedly bit on her lower lip, keeping to herself the final words she was going to finish her retort with. The teacher was actually looking at her, a small smirk adorning his kissable lips, his eyes gleaming with mischief as he told her, I will have a word with you later, Miss Jensen. At that, Sandra was, yet again, faking a sad face. She can be so mean to me. She sniffled, while wiping virtual tears with her handkerchief. Maria managed to hold herself back and merely muttered under her breath, You're such an angel. Mr. Donovan seemed to suppress a chuckle as he softly coughed. We shall continue next time, he said after a quick glance to his wristwatch. Just enjoy the last remaining 3 minutes calmly. He couldn't have hurt me, could he? Maria looked worriedly ahead of her, then, in a matter of seconds, dismissed the thought. I'm going crazy. She mentally scoffed at herself for even considering such a thing. He just could not have hurt her. There was no question about it. Maria started jottling her notebook. Then, when the bell went off, she gathered her things and went to talk to the hot jerk that was her teacher. All her classmates were out of the classroom when he finally told her in a serious tone, You shouldn't start a fight in class. I didn't start it, she exclaimed on the defensive before she dropped her gaze to the floor and pouted. Don't tell me he's taking her side. She inwardly groaned. He chuckled, then observed jokingly. But you are getting there. Maria looked at him and smiled, feeling kind of strange. I wish you had finished your sentence, though. He grinned, playfulness making his eyes twinkle in a way that made her want to drown in those endless pools of green of his. Maria turned a dark shade of pink at that, thanks to her embarrassment. It was pretty obvious what she had wanted to tell Sandra. Just go find some guy to screw. She mentally finished her earlier sentence. Mr. Donovan chuckled again, seeming to enjoy her blush. Anyway, you'll be having a whole week detention instead of only 1 day. None. She inwardly cried out in protest. Oh no. Her eyes widened in shock, and she muttered a small, though audible, So not fair. He explained in a fake defensive tone. Well, you are being rude in my classroom. Whatever, she replied, rolling her eyes, after a very short-lived frown. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her upset. Keep that up, and I'll make them too. He teased, leaning in ever so lightly from where he was seated on his chair. Maria's eyes widened at the little threat. The prospect so scary. 2 weeks. Then, upon looking at his smiling face, she just burst off laughing, realizing he was just kidding. He joined her soon enough. Okay, I think I should go now, she told him when she had gained control over her breathing again. Yes, I guess you should. He conceded, looking quite begrudging to do so, or maybe that was just her imagination. She was walking to the door when his voice stopped her. Let me give you a late paper for your next class. Damn it, I can be so stupid sometimes. Maria let out a silent sigh at the thought. No, let's face it. It's actually hard thinking about anything but how it would feel like to have his bare skin under exploring fingers, and Maria couldn't even begin to understand where that teasing, lustful voice had come from. Her thoughts were getting a little out of hand. Naughty, naughty Maria. She inwardly scolded herself. That was most definitely not the way any student should think about the new teacher, or any teacher for that matter. It must be the hormones, she reasoned. Yes, definitely the hormones. He was just too damn hot for his own good, or her own. No, I'm not going down that road again. No, I will not fantasize about him yet again. She reprimanded herself. While she had been distracted by her lustful reveries, he had risen to his feet. Maria only noticed the fact when he slipped the late paper in her hand, and for a brief moment, she felt those delicious little shocks all over her hand. Upon the loss of contact, though, it soon faded, leaving her wondering. His beautiful green eyes had gotten kind of dark. Maria could only wonder what was going on. "You should go now," he told her in a husky voice. She just nodded and headed straight to calculus. She entered the classroom, gave the teacher the note, and then went straight to the back seat, right next to Kelly's. A piece of paper landed on her desk a moment later. 10 minutes late, drooling over the teach. Maria rolled her eyes, but smiled nonetheless, and wrote back, "Getting detention already because of Sandra." She heard her friend scribbling, and again that piece of paper came to her. I wouldn't mind getting a detention with him at all. She almost laughed out loud at that. Kelly would be the girl to make a disaster look as an appealing occasion. Not that her detentions were a disaster, but still, on the second day back to school, definitely not the best way to start the year. She wrote back, "Actually, I'll have a whole week of detentions." She passed her note as the teacher was giving them her bag. Kelly gasped, getting the teacher's attention, who said, "Anything wrong?" Kelly muttered in a calm voice, "Nothing at all." Mrs. Walker nodded and continued writing. She was such a kind teacher. Maybe it's due to her to having 2 children our age. Maria mused for a moment before getting her wits together and focusing on what the teacher was saying. When the bell rang and the 2 friends were heading to AP English, which they shared with Tyler as well, Kelly was so excited. She was almost jumping up and down. She said, a smile splitting her face, "You're so lucky. I envy you for real." "Why is that?" Tyler asked, appearing at his girlfriend's side. "Damn, I didn't see him coming." Maria mused, startled. She hit his arm playfully, and then said, "You can't do that." "What?" He smirked. "Scare the hell out of me." The Burnen answered truthfully, "That is just unhealthy." Kelly observed in a joking tune, "Unhealthy? That's all you could find?" Maria just rolled her eyes at her friend, then said smiling, "Actually, yes." At 3 p.m., after Maria got changed for gym, as it was her last class, another class she shared with both Tyler and Kelly, she bumped into someone as she was walking backwards. She almost fell to the side, but some hard, strong hand sneaked around her waist and pulled her up straight. Her heart was having a moment. The kind of moment when you think it stopped for a second, then went in full speed mode. That, and her body was getting warm at the idea of being this close to him. Besides, she was having those tingles again. "Oh man, what is wrong with me?" she asked herself while damping her lips. "Are you all right?" her oh-so-handsome French teacher asked in a murmur, next to her ear, close enough that she could feel his breath. She nodded in response and put some space between them, not wanting to embarrass herself furthermore. Dropping her gaze to the floor, sensing her face redden, she said apologetically, "I'm sorry, I wasn't looking and—" She trailed off as he interrupted her by saying gently, "It's okay, no harm done." Maria raised her head and smiled at him, a true, genuine smile, then went straight to the gym room with Kelly by her side. When they were standing a little far from the crowd, she said in a dreaming tune, "I wish I was the one he held that way." Maria smiled at her, but said nothing. Her friend continued talking. I bet he's good. He drawled out the last word while wriggling her eyebrows. Slightly out of it, Maria said, really confused, "Huh?" Her friend smiled, then said, "I mean good, as in good in bed, duh." Maria's lips parted, then took the O form. Then somehow she managed to keep her friend's babbling out of her mind and started fantasizing about her French teacher again. A little bit later, the very sexy voice said from behind her, "Miss Jensen, would you mind stop zoning out?" Oh, I must be in a dipshit. Here I am imagining his voice. Now that should be unhealthy, don't you think? She mentally face-palmed in dismay. She turned around, wanting to pay attention to what was going around, and was surprised to come face to face with Mr. Donovan. She looked at him and said, confused, "What are you doing here?" Everybody started laughing their asses off. What the hell? She thought, half angry, half perplexed. He smiled and then said in a light tone, "Well, if you had not been daydreaming, you would know that your gym teacher can't teach you for a couple of days, and I'm substituting him." Again, there were giggles and chuckles everywhere, while Maria just stood there, blushing like crazy. Could one die from embarrassment? She did not think it possible. Otherwise, she would be already dead. Mr. Donovan just smiled at her. "Why don't you just join your friends and start running?" Thank goodness. He was kind enough to not say anything else. Maria jogged along with Kelly, and Tyler was soon by her other side, keeping himself back with them. After 3 runs, the new coach told them to do some push-ups. The time had passed by so quickly. Maria couldn't believe the bell was signaling the end of the day already. Wow. She was talking to Kelly when, passing by them, Mr. Donovan said, "And don't come late to your detention, too." She nodded and bit her lip, while Kelly grinned. She knew her friend didn't like detentions. Who did? "I could go instead of you," the bubbly blonde said jokingly, when he was out of earshot. Maria laughed briefly, then said, half seriously, half jokingly, "I'm afraid he will notice the difference." Kelly hit her playfully on the arm and said, "It won't be that bad. Oh, come on." She ushered her to the changing room, saying how Sandra would be all excited if she were her. Maria's heart started to flutter, thinking about how the detention could go like. Oh no, I'm not going there. I have to absolutely stop fantasizing about my freaking teacher. I bet he has plenty of girls throwing themselves at his feet. I mean, he's so good-looking that he can't be anything but a self-confessed player. Yeah, I should probably think more of him like this, so that I can get him out of my mind. I really don't need to have a stupid crush on my teacher, especially as I have a boyfriend. She thought bitterly on her way to her detention. Chapter 3. First Detention with Mr. D. As Maria was about to enter the classroom, she noticed that Mr. Donovan wasn't alone. Sandra was there as well. What the hell was she doing there? Don't tell me he gave her a detention too. She mused, horrified. Oh God, someone help me. Maria just closed the door quietly and stood there watching her argue with him. But, sir, I was being rude in her classroom too. It would only be fair that I get a detention along with her. Yep, there she was, talking about Maria like she was some garbage she couldn't stand. Damn it, I wonder what I've ever done to her. Maria thought on a sigh. Mr. Donovan frowned, then putting a blank face. He said in a rather stern voice, "Stop talking about Maria like she isn't here." Maria's eyes widened at that, and she then turned to look at Sandra just to see her reaction. Oh shit, she's glaring at me. Her gaze is fury on the way. Maria mentally grimaced. The blonde kept staring for a moment, and then stormed off. Maria sighed, frustrated. She knew that look all too well. She could only wonder what she was going to tell her sister this time. A moment later, she snapped out of her thoughts and took the seat next to the window. Then looking at the floor, she asked calmly, "So, what should I do?" She didn't get an answer, so she looked up, only to see him standing right in front of her. Damn, I didn't hear a thing. When did he move? She thought, startled. Her French teacher's features were kind of grim. He sighed, and then looking out of the window, he asked, sounding genuinely curious, "Is she always like this?" Maria smiled, then told him jokingly, "No, she usually tries to get free of detentions." The comment made him smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. His beautiful, smothering green eyes that were now looking at her. Oh God, she could get lost in those eyes. Stop it already. She inwardly reprimanded herself. You're being stupid, Maria. She averted her gaze, then asked again about what she had to do. He answered her, smirking evilly. Well, there are some boxes that you can help me with. She stood up and followed him to the supply room. There were about 6 boxes. She bent down, picking up one, then put it on the desk, all the while feeling her every move watched by her extremely hot teacher, who was leaning against the wall. She opened the box, then pulled out some books and started organizing them on the shelves. While she was accomplishing the chore, they were having quite an interesting conversation, though a little bit unusual for a student to have with a teacher. So, did you live in France before? He asked first. Yes, I did until I was 15, actually. She trailed off, not wanting to give details that would more certainly just bore the shit out of him. I really love it there. Europeans are more open-minded. And why did you leave? He was actually interested. Well, that made her feel kind of warm inside. It's just that I came to live here with my father after my mom passed away. She really couldn't bring herself to say the word died. She just couldn't. Oh, not the best reasons to move from home. I can only guess you've had some tough days. Was his tone really concerned? I think I'm imagining things. Yes, definitely. She mentally reasoned, trying to dismiss the thought that he might be interested in her the way she was in him. Maria was glad she didn't say, "Oh, I'm so sorry," or something along the lines. She despised that sentence with passion. It's just that coming from persons who barely knew her and didn't know her mom, it was way too hypocritical to her. She sighed, but said nonetheless, Yes, I had quite a difficult time adapting here. I understand that, she told her simply, before adding in a joking tone. Especially with people like Sandra and Co., huh? Maria couldn't suppress the giggle that escaped her mouth. She then turned around and said, Yes, I totally agree with that, Mr. Donovan. She had to add that, Mr. Donovan. That is because she began to think she was getting a little too familiar with her teacher. And it didn't help her in getting rid of this attraction she had for him. Not in the slightest. He grinned, then frowned. Oh no, she thought, frozen to the spot. I think he doesn't like my attitude, but it's way too easy to talk to him. He said in a serious tone, My father isn't here, young lady, so you're not to call me anything but Blake. Maria's eyes widened at that. For a moment, it was quiet. Then he burst off laughing, and she soon joined him, though still confused. What is it with the formal English? She thought, half amused, half perplexed. And does he really want me to call him by his first name? Is he? No, don't go there, Maria. He's probably this cool with everyone. He just wants you to be at ease or something. Don't think too much of it. Mr. Donovan, it makes me feel old. He explained, a smile tugging at his mouth. When out of school hours, call me Blake, please. Maria returned the smile, then took one of his desk accessories to busy herself. Now looking at him, said in a timid voice, Okay. I think she's just jealous of you or something, she said after a moment of silence. A beautiful blonde like her should definitely be jealous of a plain brunette like me. Yeah, right. She answered him, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Well, you get the attention without as much effort as her, I'm sure of that. She supplied in a flat tone. Nah, I don't get attention at all. Maria waved the thought away with a flick of her hand. If it wasn't for my accent, that is stuck with me, she added jokingly. She turned around to pick another box, but came face to face with her teacher, who said in a low, husky voice, But I love your accent. And that was her cue to start blushing like crazy at only 1 feet from him. How embarrassing. She then tried to look as collected as she could muster when she said, Well, I think the opinion is not shared. But since she was still recovering from that sentence, which she was sure she didn't mean anything by it, her voice came out low, almost a murmur, and her breathing was ragged. He was looking at her as if he was not seeing her. He was lost in his thoughts, or so looked like. He seemed to snap out of his trance after a minute or so, and Maria fell out of his spell, instantly cursing herself for being so stupid. She was about to continue her chore when his voice came stopping her. No, it's enough for today. It's 5 p.m. already. Maria couldn't gather the courage to look at him. She therefore just passed by him with her head bent. She picked her backpack from where she had left it on the desk and went for the door, when suddenly he blocked her way. In what sounded like a slightly hurt voice, he asked, Did I do something wrong? She looked up at him, and then, smiling, reassured him. No, not at all. It's just... She couldn't finish her sentence. She was expressing herself way too freely with him. She should pay more attention. Yes, I should keep that in mind, she told herself. It's just... She sought for an answer. Blushing again, Maria just muttered, I can't. Sorry, sir. I mean, Blake, I've got to go. He moved out of the way, and she slipped out of the classroom, her heart beating too fast for her liking. I should try to control my hormones around him. It's going to get me right into troubles. I can see that coming. As Maria opened the front door of the hellhole that was supposed to be her home, she heard an all too familiar high-pitched voice. I knew it, she muttered under her breath. I've seen it coming earlier. I wonder what she said about me this time, though. Her stepmother's voice rang in her ear like the worst melody possible. Maria, you decide to come home eventually. Now, what was that supposed to mean? Maria just put her blank face on, her unreadable gaze, and then entered the living room. As expected, next to 𝘸𝘀𝘀 was her dear sister, Sandra. Oh God, please let her finish soon. I'm not in the mood to listen to her. Maria mentally whined. Eyeing her warily, she gasped. Is that what you wrote to school today? Huh? To say Maria was confused wouldn't even cover the half of it. Your top is way too revealing, her stepmother explained in very serious tone. You're kidding, right? Maria just couldn't put the sarcasm off. 𝘸𝘀𝘀 was passionate. Her stepmother just glared at her, then continued in an angry tone. It's because of your new English teacher. That's... She didn't get to finish as her sister corrected her in a flat tone. French teacher. Clara looked lovingly at her younger sister and told her in a low, kind voice. Thanks, Sandra. My pleasure, Clara, was the smug response she got. Maria could only guess how happy her sworn enemy must feel. Then the Diablo faced her again. So you went late, just so you could get a detention, huh? No, she almost yelled, then frowned, inwardly cursing Sandra for being such a bitch, and Clara for being so dumb. Just let me tell Mark about that. She won't be happy, she threatened. What is she like? 4 or something? She's gonna tell my father. Oh, I'm scared. Big time. Maria had to hold back a snicker. She can really be so dumb. I mean, only a blind wouldn't notice that father and I are like strangers. Even Sandra rolled her eyes at that, while Maria kept a straight face, just staring at her like she was crazy. Sometimes one can express so much more just being silent. Right now felt like one of those moments to Maria. Clara reddened a little. Then, after some help, with Sandra's whispering, she said smirking. You're punished for the week. You'll not go to Sandra's party Friday. Maria almost laughed at that. I wasn't invited to begin with, and I wouldn't go anyway. Not that you could keep me from going if I wanted to, she told her stepmother in an exasperated tone. Maria never went to any of her parties. Why should this time matter? Was Sandra getting dumb as well? She eyed Clara with unprofessed but unshielded disgust, then shook her head at her and left in the direction of her room. She used to make her life miserable. Now that she had turned 18, however, she won't have the chance. Maria was no longer under her father's responsibility, which made everything she might do, or not, for that matter, none of her business. It felt good to be free. So good. She can't do anything to me now. She'll just have to bear with it until I'm out of here. She mused, a smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. Maria was lost in her dreams of a better future, laying on her bed, when her phone went off, signaling a message. It was from Tyler. Hi, how was detention? He asked. Not too bad, she responded. Good. Sandra is throwing a party Friday. You'll go with me, right? What the hell was he talking about? He couldn't be serious, right? He must just be fooling around. Yes, he had to be. Why should we go anyway? She's the head cheerleader, and I'm the new quarterback. I can't miss the party, was his reply. Maria rolled her eyes at that. You don't have to go. Oh, come on. For once, be cool. Now that was unusual. What was wrong with him all of a sudden? You know I don't like her. Don't ask me that. Whatever, babe. EXO, see you. Did he seriously get mad at her? Nevertheless, Maria answered with a text that said, EXO, see you, TKCR. So that was why Sandra looked so smug earlier. Scratch what I said earlier. She's not getting dumb. She thought bitterly while burying her face into the pillow. I could always sneak out and go with him if it's so important. But the thing is, I know it'll only bring more troubles. Besides, I bet the party isn't even worth it. Maria was so confused. The right thing to do as his girlfriend would be to go with him. But what about her feelings towards Sandra? Water and oil don't mix, right? Well, the same applied for them. It was that simple. Maria just sighed, then pulled her phone out of her pocket one more time and called Kelly. She was the person she could talk to, the only one that would listen. She thought while worrying her lower lip on her way to the exit.